The day I came home for the last time, I had a Purple Heart in my bag, a honorable discharge in my pocket, and 11 years of discipline carved into every part of who I was. I had survived things that most people will never see, never feel, and never have to carry. I had learned how to hold myself together in the middle of chaos. I had learned how to be strong when strength was the only option. I thought that coming home would be the reward for all of it. I thought that finally, after 11 years of sacrifice, I would get to rest. I would get to live. I would get to be with my husband, Marcus, the man I had loved since I was 22 years old. The man who had stood in his dress shirt and khakis at my first deployment send-off and told me that he would be right there waiting when I came back. I believed him. For 11 years, I believed him. I held on to that belief in the cold, in the heat, in the noise, and in the silence. I held on to his face when things got dark. I wrote him letters I never sent because I was afraid he would hear the fear in them. And when I finally came home, when I finally walked through that door, what I found was not the man I had loved. What I found was a stranger who had been using my name, my income, my trust, and my absence to build an entire life with someone else. This is my story. And I am still standing. My name is Renee. I grew up in a small town in central Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows your last name and your grandmother's last name too. My father was a veteran. His father was a veteran. Service was not just something we talked about in my family, it was something we lived, something we breathed, something that sat at the dinner table with us every night. I enlisted at 21. Right after a year of community college that left me feeling like I was running in place. The Army gave me direction. It gave me structure. It gave me a sense of purpose that nothing else in my life had managed to offer. And in those early years, it gave me Marcus. We met at a barbecue at a mutual friend's house the summer before my first deployment. He was funny and warm, and he looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the room. He asked me questions about my training, about my goals, about where I saw myself in 10 years, and I remember thinking that no one had ever asked me those questions before. He was a high school history teacher. Stable, patient, the kind of man who remembered small things, your favorite coffee order, the name of your childhood dog. Within 8 months, we were engaged. Within 14, we were married. We were young, but it never felt reckless. It felt like the most certain thing I had ever done. My first deployment was to Kuwait. I was 22 years old and I was terrified, but I did not show it. Marcus drove me to the base the morning I shipped out. He held my face in his hands and he said, "Come back to me." And I said, "I always do." That was the beginning of a promise that I kept for the next 11 years. He was my anchor. When I was overseas, I thought about our apartment, about the sound of his laugh, about Sunday mornings and coffee and the way he always burned the toast but pretended he had not. Those small things kept me grounded when the ground beneath me was anything but solid. Over the years, I was deployed 4 times. Kuwait, Afghanistan, Germany, and a second tour in Afghanistan that was the hardest of all of them. In between deployments, I came home to Marcus, and every time felt like falling in love again. Or at least, that is what I told myself. Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed. The distance that crept in slowly, like a fog you do not notice until you cannot see your own hands. The way he seemed relieved when I got new orders rather than disappointed. The way the conversations got shorter and the explanations got longer. But I was trained to focus forward. I was trained to trust the mission. And the mission I had chosen. Our marriage, our life, I did not allow myself to question it. Not until it was impossible to do anything else. The My discharge came through in March. I was 33 years old, 11 years served, and for the first time in over a decade I had no orders waiting for me. No deployment date. No mission briefing. Just a life to come home to and a husband who had texted me that morning saying he could not wait to have me back. I remember reading that text on the transport and smiling to myself. I remember feeling a kind of warmth that I had been starving for. I landed. I drove to the house we owned together, a house I had contributed to with every paycheck for years but had spent maybe 14 cumulative months actually living in, and I walked through the front door into what I thought was the beginning of the rest of my life. Marcus was not home. He had left a note saying he was at a faculty meeting and would be back by 6. The house was clean, which surprised me because Marcus had always been the kind of person who left dishes in the sink for 3 days. I walked through the rooms slowly, taking in the small details. New furniture in the living room I had not seen in photos. A different bedspread. A candle on the bathroom counter that smelled like something a woman would choose. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that 11 years apart had made me suspicious of ordinary things. I made myself a cup of coffee and I sat at the kitchen table and I waited. Marcus came home at 6:15. He hugged me. He kissed me. He made dinner. Everything seemed normal on the surface, the way a stage looks real until you walk around to the back and see the scaffolding. We talked for hours that night. About my plans, about his work, about the house. He did not ask me many questions about the deployment. He used to always ask. That was the first thing that crept under my skin, small enough to dismiss but real enough to stay. The second thing was the phone. In all our years of marriage, Marcus had never been protective of his phone. He left it on tables, handed it to me to look up directions, fell asleep with it beside him face up. Now it was always face down. Always in his pocket. Always on silent. I noticed it the way you notice a rock in your shoe, not enough to stop you, but impossible to ignore completely. The thing that broke everything open was not dramatic. It was a credit card statement. I was going through our finances the second week I was home, trying to understand where we stood, what our savings looked like, what we needed to plan for now that I was transitioning to civilian life. Marcus had always handled the bills while I was away. I had always trusted him to do that. I pulled up the joint account and I started scrolling through transactions, and what I found stopped me cold. There were hotel charges. Not one or two, dozens of them over the past 3 years. Weekend bookings at hotels 2 towns over. A few that were further, one that was in Nashville, one in Charleston. There were restaurant charges at places I had never been to, the kind of places you take someone to impress them, not the burger spots Marcus and I used to go to on his teacher's salary. There were gift purchases. Jewelry stores. A spa. Flower deliveries to an address that was not ours. And threaded through all of it, consistent as a heartbeat, were cash withdrawals. Hundreds at a time, sometimes twice a week, for as far back as I could scroll. I sat at that table for a long time. My hands were very still. My breathing was very controlled. Years of training had given me the ability to stay calm in moments that should break you, and I used every bit of that training to stay in my chair and think clearly. I did not cry. I did not scream. I opened a new browser tab and I started pulling records. Over the next 4 days, while Marcus went to work and came home and had dinner with me and slept beside me, I built a picture. I created a spreadsheet. I pulled bank records, credit card statements, receipts stored in our shared email account, an account Marcus had apparently forgotten I had access to because he had been using it to confirm hotel bookings. I found emails. I found a name. Her name was Dana. She was 31 years old. She was a dental hygienist. She lived 20 minutes away from our house. And based on the timestamps of those emails, the hotel confirmations, the dinner reservations, the small notes back and forth that made my stomach turn, she had been in Marcus's life for at least 4 years. Maybe longer. She had been in his life while I was in Afghanistan. She had been in his life while I was sleeping in a bunk 12 time zones away, writing letters home in my head because I was afraid to burden him with how hard things were. For years. I kept coming back to that number. For years of hotel weekends and jewelry and restaurant dinners and cash she probably used for whatever she needed, cash pulled from our account, from my paycheck, from the military income one sent home faithfully every single month. I did not just feel betrayed. I felt robbed. I felt like I had been a source of funding for a life I was never invited into. On the 5th day, I called a lawyer. I want to be honest about something. When I say I kept my composure, I do not mean I was not in pain. I was in extraordinary pain. The kind that sits so deep you cannot locate it in any one part of your body, it is just everywhere, in your chest and your throat and behind your eyes and in the tips of your fingers. I had spent 11 years anchoring myself to this man. I had turned down opportunities, declined assignments that would have advanced my career faster, sent money home, gone without, carried his face in my memory through things I would never fully describe to anyone. And he had spent that time building a second life. A warm, comfortable, well-funded second life that I paid for, but I had learned something important in the army. Emotion is information. You process it, you use it, you do not let it use you. So I used the pain. I used it to stay focused. I used it to make sure that when the confrontation came, I was not the one who was unprepared. I told Marcus on a Wednesday evening. I chose Wednesday deliberately, not a Friday, because I did not want him to have the weekend to regroup and strategize. Wednesday, after dinner, dishes done, nothing left to be distracted by. I sat down across from him at the kitchen table and I placed a single printed sheet of paper in front of him. It was a summary page. The hotel dates. The cash withdrawals. The email thread, selected excerpts. Dana's name at the top in plain font. I did not say anything at first. I let him read it. I watched his face go through a progression that I had not been prepared for, not guilt first, which I expected, but a kind of calculation. He was thinking. He was deciding which version of this he was going to present to me. And that, more than anything, told me everything I needed to know about who he actually was. He started with denial. He said the charges were for work trips, that the school had reimbursed him in cash, that he could explain everything if I would just let him talk. I did not raise my voice. I pointed to the jewelry store charge and I asked him what work trip required a women's bracelet from a boutique in Nashville. He pivoted to minimizing. It was a mistake, it was nothing serious, it had only happened a few times. I pointed to the spreadsheet I had prepared, 3.5 years of documented transactions, and I asked him to define a few times for me. That was when he stopped trying to manage it and it came apart. He told me that he had been lonely. That 11 years was a long time. That he had tried, that he had really tried, but that he had needs that I was not there to meet. He said it like loneliness was a justification. Like absence, my absence, the absence I had no choice about, the absence that paid our mortgage and built our savings, was something I had done to him. He said he had wanted to tell me. He said he had meant to end it. He said a lot of things in that kitchen. And every single one of them was designed to shift the weight of his choices onto my shoulders. I listened to all of it. I let him finish. And when he was done, I said, calmly, clearly, without a single crack in my voice, I have already spoken to a lawyer. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. I am keeping the house. The look on his face when I said that, the shock of realizing that I was not devastated, that I was not falling apart, that I had come to that table not to have a breakdown but to close a chapter, that look is something I will carry with me for a long time. Not with satisfaction, exactly. But with a clarity that felt very much like freedom. What happened next was not clean. Marcus did not take the 30 days gracefully. He swung between begging and bargaining and a low, quiet anger that sometimes surfaced as cruelty. He told me our marriage had been over for years. He told me I was emotionally absent even when I was physically present. He said things about my service, dismissive things, diminishing things, that I think he said because he needed to believe them in order to justify what he had done. I did not argue with any of it. I had a lawyer. I had documentation. I had 11 years of direct deposit records and a joint property deed with my name on it. I did not need to argue. But I did need to understand the full scope of what he had done. And as the legal process began, that scope turned out to be far larger than I had initially realized. The first thing my lawyer, a woman named Patricia who had worked with military families for 20 years, told me was to get a complete financial audit. Not just the credit card statements I had already pulled, everything. Every account, every asset, every debt. She had seen enough military spouse cases to know that financial exposure was often deeper than the initial discovery suggested. She was right. Over the following 3 weeks, as the discovery process began and Marcus's attorney started the reluctant work of producing documentation, what emerged was a financial picture that took my breath away in a way that the betrayal alone had not quite managed. Marcus had opened a separate savings account 3 years ago, the same year the hotel charges started escalating, under a slightly different version of his name, Marcus T. Calloway instead of Marcus Thomas Calloway. Small enough that casual scanning might not catch it. He had been making regular transfers into this account from our joint savings. The total in that account was just under $43,000. Money that had been built from my military income. Money I had sent home from deployments. Money I had earned in hazard pay during my second tour in Afghanistan. He had not spent it on Dana, at least not obviously. It appeared to simply be sitting there, a nest egg he had been quietly building, most likely in anticipation of a future that did not include me. My lawyer looked at the documentation and said, very evenly, he was preparing to leave you. He just had not decided when. The account, the years of transfers, the parallel relationship, it was not chaos, it was a plan. A slow, deliberate, patient plan that had been running parallel to our marriage for years. He had not just betrayed me emotionally. He had been strategically positioning himself financially while I was overseas serving the country that paid the income he was systematically redirecting. When Patricia explained the full implications of this, the marital asset rules in our state, the documentation we had, the timeline of transfers relative to my deployment schedules, something settled in me. A decision that had been forming in the background since the moment I sat at that kitchen table with those bank statements became completely solid. Statements became completely solid. I was going to pursue everything I was legally entitled to. Not out of revenge, I want to be clear about that. Not from bitterness, not from a need to hurt him the way he had hurt me. But because what he had done was not just personal betrayal, it was financial exploitation. It was a systematic diversion of money I had earned under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. And I had spent 11 years learning that when someone violates a trust they swore to keep, there are consequences. That is not revenge. That is accountability. I instructed Patricia to file for divorce on grounds of marital misconduct. In our state, documented financial misconduct during a marriage is admissible and relevant to asset division. The hidden account, the pattern of transfers, the evidence of a long-term extramarital relationship funded partly by joint assets, all of it would go into the record. I also contacted a Veterans Services legal advocate through a program I had learned about during my transition briefing, an organization that provides additional legal support for veterans in civil matters. They assigned a second advisor to my case who helped me document the specific connection between my deployment income and the assets Marcus had been diverting. That documentation would prove to be very important to Marcus, through his attorney, initially pushed back hard. He argued that the savings account had been funded through his income as well, that the marital home had appreciated due to renovations he had managed during my absences, that the divorce should be a simple 50-50 split. His lawyer was good. Calm, organized, good at framing things in the most neutral possible language. But Patricia was better. And the documentation we had was airtight. There was one moment in the process that I want to describe because it mattered to me. During a mediation session, the second one, after the first had broken down, Marcus looked at me across the table and said, "I gave you the life you came home to. I maintained everything while you were gone." And Patricia started to respond and I held up one hand, quietly, and I said, "You maintained everything with money I sent home from a combat zone. So let's be accurate about who built what. His lawyer actually paused. Patricia later told me it was the most effective thing said in the entire mediation. Not because it was theatrical. Because it was simply, completely true. The divorce was finalized 7 months after I filed. In that time, I want to tell you about what happened, because I think it is important for anyone listening who is navigating something similar to understand what justice actually looks like in practice. It is not fast. It is not dramatic. It is a long sequence of documents and filings and hearings and negotiations, and it requires you to stay methodical when everything inside you wants to be done with it. Here is what the final settlement included. I retained full ownership of the marital home. The property had been purchased with a combination of my military income and a VA loan for which I was the qualifying veteran, a fact that Marcus's attorney had initially glossed over but which proved significant to the division of equity. Marcus received a share of the equity that accounted for his contribution but excluded the appreciated value tied directly to the VA loan terms and my income contributions during deployment periods. My legal team was very precise about this. The hidden account, the $43,000, was treated by the court as a marital asset that had been deliberately concealed. It was divided, but the act of concealment was factored into the court's assessment of good faith. Marcus was ordered to pay a portion of my legal fees as a result of the documentation fraud. Patricia had told me at the start that this outcome was possible but not guaranteed. It was gratifying to see it confirmed. Marcus's retirement account, which he had been building through the teacher's pension system for 12 years, was subject to a qualified domestic relations order. I was awarded a portion of it. He had benefited from my financial contributions during our marriage, contributions that had allowed him to invest consistently in his own retirement while managing a household income that would not otherwise have supported that level of saving. The QDRO reflected that reality. Dana, for what it is worth, was never a legal party to any of this. She was evidence. She was context. She was the reason a pattern of financial behavior made sense when you looked at the timeline. But she was not a defendant and she was not my focus. Some people told me I should be angrier at her, that she was equally responsible. I thought about that for a while and I came to a different conclusion. Marcus made vows to me. Dana did not. Marcus was the person who looked me in the eyes before every deployment and told me he would be here when I came back. Dana had made no such promises. My case was with Marcus. That is where I directed my energy, and that is where the accountability landed. By the time the settlement was signed, I had recovered the house, a fair division of long-term assets, legal fee contributions, and a financial position that, while not what it would have been had none of this happened, was solid enough to build from. More importantly, I had a clear record. A legal record that said, in the language of courts and documents and signed agreements, that what he had done was real and that it had consequences. I printed the final order and I held it for a while before I filed it. I thought about the woman who had driven to that base 22 years old and terrified and in love and full of a future that seemed very bright. I thought about what she had earned. And I thought about what she deserved. I need to talk about the people around us. Because betrayal in a marriage does not stay contained inside the marriage. It radiates outward, and the way people respond to it tells you things about them that you cannot unknow. Marcus's family had always been warm to me. His mother, Carol, had sent me care packages during deployments, good ones, with things she knew I actually needed, not just cookies. His sister Jennifer had been my emergency contact during my first tour. These were people I had counted as part of my own family. When the divorce became known, I expected difficult. I did not expect what actually happened. Carol called me 3 weeks into the process. She was not calling to express support. She was calling to ask me to consider reconciliation. She said that Marcus was going through something and that she hoped I would be patient with him. She said marriage was hard and that long separations put pressure on people. She said, and I remember this very clearly, "You were gone a lot, Renee." That's just the truth. I stayed on the phone for 3 more minutes and then I said goodbye, and I have not spoken to Carol since. Jennifer was quieter about it but ultimately took the same position. She reached out once to say she was sorry about how things turned out, but the phrasing, sorry about how things turned out, not sorry about what Marcus did, made clear where her loyalty sat. I did not blame her for loving her brother. But I noted the choice. And I adjusted accordingly. My own family was different, and I am grateful for that. My mother, who had never entirely trusted Marcus, a fact she had been diplomatic enough to mostly keep to herself, was steady and present in a way I needed more than I knew how to ask for. She drove up from Ohio and stayed with me for 2 weeks during the hardest part of the filing process. She did not try to fix anything. She just made sure I ate and slept and occasionally left the house. My younger brother Aaron, who had served briefly himself before a knee injury, called me every Sunday morning for 4 months. He did not give advice. He just called the Army that the hardest terrain you will ever cross is your own. And I knew how to cross hard terrain. It has been 2 years now since I sat at that kitchen table with a printed spreadsheet and watched my marriage end in real time. I want to tell you what my life looks like now, not because the point is to show you that everything got better and tied up cleanly, but because I think the truth of where I landed is more useful than a perfect ending. I still live in the house. I repainted the bedroom. I pulled out the candle from the bathroom and I replaced it with something I chose. Small things, but they mattered. The house is mine now in a way it never quite felt before, not because Marcus is gone from it, but because I have filled the space with choices that are entirely my own. I am working. I transitioned into a role with a veterans services nonprofit, working on advocacy and outreach for women veterans in financial distress. I am not going to pretend that the path to this work was a straight line. The first year of civilian employment after 11 years of military service is its own kind of disorientation, and I had difficult months adjusting. But I found it. And it matters to me in a way that I did not fully expect. I talk to women in situations that are not entirely unlike mine, women who trusted people who took advantage of that trust, women who are trying to figure out what accountability looks like when the person who wronged them is also the person they built their life around. I do not tell them what to do. I tell them what I did and I let them decide what is useful. Marcus, from what I understand through people who still know us both, has moved in with Dana. I have no feelings about this that take up much space. They are welcome to each other and to whatever they build. What I hope is that he is honest with her in the ways he was not honest with me. What I suspect is that honesty is not his strong suit. I am not in a relationship. I am not looking for one. Right now. I have spent the past 2 years learning how to live with myself without organizing my life around someone else's needs and expectations, and I am finding that I am considerably better company than I had given myself credit for. There will be time for that when the time is right. I am in no rush. What I want to leave you with is this. I served this country for 11 years. I did my job. I kept my word. I was not perfect, no one is perfect, and I will not rewrite myself into someone without flaw just because I was wronged. But I kept the vows I made. I showed up for the mission. And when I discovered what had been done in the space my absence created, I did not collapse. I documented. I organized. I filed. I stood in mediation rooms and courtrooms and conversations that would have broken a less prepared person, and I held my ground. The Army taught me many things. It taught me how to endure. It taught me how to adapt. It taught me that the most dangerous enemy is not always in front of you, sometimes it is the one you trusted to hold the line behind you. And it taught me that when you survive something that was meant to break you, what you are left with is not ruins. What you are left with is the clearest possible version of who you actually are. I am 35 years old. I own my home. I do work that matters. I have people in my life who are exactly who they say they are. I know who I am and I know what I can survive. And I can tell you with complete certainty, not from optimism, but from evidence, that the woman who came home to those divorce papers is not the woman who is speaking to you now. She is stronger. She is clearer. She is, in every meaningful way, still standing. If you are listening to this and you recognize your own life somewhere in this story, if something I said landed somewhere real and familiar, I want you to know that the spreadsheet I made at that kitchen table was the beginning of my way out. Not the screaming, not the confrontation, not even the filing. The beginning was the moment I decided to look clearly at what was actually in front of me, instead of the story I had been telling myself about what should be there. That decision, the decision to see clearly, is always available to you. No matter how long you have been looking away. Thank you for listening. I am Renee. And I am still standing.